Welcome to the Fatherhood Challenge program. The Fatherhood Challenge is a movement to awaken and inspire fathers everywhere to take great pride in their role and to challenge society to understand how important fathers are to the stability of an environment and culture. We're going to encourage and challenge each other to step up and do courageous things that make our families and communities better places. So let's get to it. Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. It's always good to have you with me. My guest today his name is Herman Few, and he is a sports psychology consultant, a sports analyzer, and former NFL recruiter. He has also been involved with other fatherhood organizations and initiatives, and we will talk about those a little bit later on. But I like to keep to our tradition of starting off with a dad joke. So, Herman, do you have a dad joke for us?
Yes, absolutely. And I have to say before I give this great joke, I have to tell you that this is compliments from my son. He told me this when I believe he was 6 or 7 years old. I'm not a joke guy, but this is something that resonated. So this is my go-to. So this is the joke. What do you call a sleeping lawnmower? No,
Hmm.
what do you call it? A
I,
bulldozer.
I-
I
you were
know, I know.
absolutely right. It is a great joke. Your son's got great taste for what
Yeah,
for what is a good joke.
right. I don't know that I can say he got that from me, but
Well,
I
it could
just
have fooled me. Even the delivery was good.
right.
Well, Herman, thank you so much for being on the show and joining me. It's great to have you here. So let's go ahead and just get right into it. So we've talked a little bit before the episode, and I mean a little bit before that too. But you've have quite an interesting background of what led us to this discussion. So tell me a little bit about your home life and how you grew up.
Well, let's see. I had a very interesting upbringing. My father was in United States Air Force, so I was at least the first part of my life. I was considered to be a military brat, as they say, meaning we. It looked as though we were going to live all over the country. So I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota. Lived there for a couple of years. Then we moved to Michigan, a small city in Michigan. I don't even remember the name of it. We were there for, I believe, 2 years. Then we moved to Grand Forks, North Dakota. We were there for 4 years. I lived on an Air Force base, and literally, there's nothing in at that time. There was nothing in Grand Forks, North Dakota, but the Air Force base and a Sears and a Kmart outside the base. I remember on the weekends that was a big thing for us to leave the base and go to Sears or Kmart. And we were there for 4 years, and then we moved to Washington D.C. Well, Virginia, just outside of Washington D.C. My father was a ROTC instructor, so he was at a couple of the universities out there: Georgetown, Catholic University, and University of Maryland. And then finally, when I was 10 years old, we moved to Los Angeles, and he was stationed at Los Angeles Air Force Station. And from that point forward, I didn't move anymore, and I finished up the rest of my elementary school. Went to at that time called junior high school, and went to high school, all in the same location, Harbor City, California, just outside of Los Angeles. Um, so aside from being in a lot of different places, um, I grew up I grew up in a family that was, I think it was, I would consider, at least by today's standards, traditional, meaning, my father, being a military guy, he was into his career, and my mother, she was a homemaker, a housewife. So everything was very traditional. She did the cooking, the cleaning, took care of the kids. My father would go to work, and he was quote unquote the breadwinner. And that was pretty much how it was until I reached my mid to late teens. And at that point, my parents started having severe marital problems, and their relationship deteriorated. And then the home became a lot different. Whereas before, my memories as a youngster, things were very organized and very tranquil, and I had a very happy upbringing. But by the time became a teenager, things were very difficult emotionally. Um, I didn't. I can't say that I was a child that dealt with not having. I always had a roof over my head, those type of things, but emotionally, things were getting very, very difficult. And I think my father was having a lot of difficulties with transitioning from the military into the civilian life. And I think that was difficult for him with respect to dealing with his family and dealing with me. you know, and by the way, I had a sister that was a couple of years younger than me. So it was just the two of us. So basically, we were a family of four.
It sounds like it was quite a traumatic change just from the marital situation and how that impacted you. Did you ever feel stressed from that or anxiety from the marriage falling apart?
Very much so. I was very What's interesting was I was very, very close with my mother, but I really identified with my father, as a role model. I felt in a lot of ways, which I think was very stressful for me. I couldn't understand why we were really having as many problems as we were having because I really felt like I was much like him, and I felt like in a lot of ways I wanted to be like him, you know. Um, so the stress was kind of like not really understanding what was going on and then obviously seeing my mother become very unhappy, seeing my father very frustrated, and then the uncertainty of literally every day what it was going to look like in terms of arguing. And you knew something big was about ready to blow up and happen. You just didn't know when and what. And that's what I carried with me for really the bulk of my teenage years until later on they ended up divorcing, but that was later on.
How did your life change when you had kids? And what struggles did you run into in trying to be involved and stay involved in their lives? And did the impact from what we just talked about with your childhood, did you feel any of that as you became a father?
Well, first of all, um so I had kids what I consider to be later. Um so I have two children. I have a daughter and I have a son. And when my daughter was born, I was 38 years old. That was my first child. I was married. Um, Me and my wife, we had been married for 9 years before my daughter was actually born. And it had got to the point where we were wondering, well, maybe we were not going to be blessed with kids, that maybe we were going to have to adopt some kids to be parents. At first, early in the marriage, she wasn't getting pregnant. And then she was getting pregnant, but she was miscarrying. So, but eventually my daughter was born, and you talk about how did my life change. I mean, I felt like I was born again. I mean, I was so excited. And I felt my whole purpose in life had changed because being a husband, I felt responsible for my wife. And even though it was just me and her, I saw us as a family, so I felt responsible for the family. But then when my daughter was born, that just took it to another level. and I was there when she was born, and I just remember to this day looking at her after she was born and our eyes coming together, and, it was just kinda like she gave me a look like, "Nah, I'm here, so it's on you, buddy. You're gonna have to take care of me." And I just you know, and I just it was just man, I was overcome with joy,
That's
really.
such a powerful moment, isn't it?
Oh, man, absolutely, and I mean, it's the best way to say it, like you just said, is just powerful, powerful. I was just so overcome. I felt so blessed, you know. Yeah, yeah, and and then it really, I think, it brought me back to the early years of when I was a kid, because as I shared with you, the early years of my childhood were really good. I really enjoyed my childhood. So I immediately flipped into the mode that even though she was an infant, I had all these plans for her and her childhood. And I
Mhm.
wanted her to do this. And that's why, like, when I think about how I grew up, it was funny because it was like a tale of two cities, two
Yep.
extremes, but I wanted nothing but the best for my daughter, and, that's what it was. Powerful.
Was it easy to stay engaged and to be involved in her life all the time throughout her childhood?
It was absolutely easy in well, it would this was kinda like a tale of two cities too because, while, I was married, it was absolutely that. I mean, I was a very hands-on dad. Um, I didn't have a problem. I'd comb her hair, bathe her, dress her, um, all the things that I remember only my mother did when I was a kid because that was the mother's role and the father didn't bother himself with those things. I was the type of father that bothered himself with everything, you
Mm.
know. So it wasn't difficult because I think from the time she was born, I decided that I want to be engaged. I want all these moments. um, I embraced them. I didn't look at it as work. I looked at it as this is what I want. I looked at it as this was a blessing and I've been blessed. So, though not to say there wasn't challenges, but there were challenges that I looked for.
Did that always continue throughout the relationship of your daughter? Was it that access to her and that engagement, was that always easy to maintain?
It was, however, about 4 years after she was born, my son was born, and I think because me and her were so close, she was probably, to say the least, a little resentful when my son came along, and I had to tell her, "There's enough of me to go around for you and your brother." So,
Mm.
um, but that was really, in all fairness, that was a short period of time, and once she bought into that, then I was engaged with both of them individually and collectively. I thought it was important that they had their own individual identity, but then I also thought it was important that they collectively, as brother and sister, as I used to tell them, you must always have each other's back. You must always be there for each other, without being overbearing, but always be supportive. And here we are now. My daughter's 19 and my son is 15, and they have a very close relationship. And I think a lot of that has to do with the engagement that I had with them individually and collectively.
Did you ever have any barriers to being able to, stay engaged with them as they were growing up?
That's an interesting question. The only barriers that occur was, unfortunately, me and their mother, my wife, um, our relationship came to an abrupt ending, and unfortunately, it became a child custody dispute, and she wanted to relocate to Southern California. We were in Northern California, so just logistics made things difficult. You know, um, I obviously, because for the longest I still was in Northern California working while they were in Southern California for about 5 years, and then eventually I moved to Southern California. And now I did have joint legal and I had joint physical custody. So our custodial time was close to 50-50. It was a little bit more on her side. But when I was with the children, no, we were very, very engaged. I was very, very engaged with their activities and um, just connected to them. We were very connected. Spent a lot of time talking, and I really focused on doing quality things with them. Um, we would do stuff like take walks, go to the park, go to the beach, do a lot of things where we could interact with each other.
Was it ever a challenge to separate yourself from the stress of a relationship falling apart and then just see your time with your kids as its own separate thing? Or was it sometimes hard to keep those two things unblended from each other?
I think because the relationship had gotten so bad that it wasn't hard to separate them because it was like again it was two extremes. The unfortunate happenings between me and their mother, and then my beautiful relationship with them. So the only way they cross pollinated was when there was issues with the custody stuff, the legal stuff, or maybe issues that maybe me and their mother had to address. But if and believe it or not, you may say, well, how could you do this? But I just again I cherish the times and the moments with them that I would not when I was with them, I was with them. And I just kind of blocked a lot of stuff out, including even my career. I blocked a lot of I had to put a lot of stuff on the back burner. Another relationship, my career, because it took so much me to be able to be present for my kids. And that I believe that became my number one yearning in life was that relationship.
I've always imagined it being a very, very big challenge to try to keep your time with your kids insulated from everything else that's going on. It was very admirable that you were able to do that. I just can't imagine how difficult it was to do that.
I mean, it was tough. It was tough, but I think I stayed focused on it because I knew there's no way you can have a breakup where it doesn't affect your kids. And all kids, I believe all kids want their mother and father to be together. So when the reality to me was that couldn't happen, I really felt bad for my kids. I felt like they were missing out on something. So I think because of that, I was determined and in a lot of ways would overcompensate in other areas to try to bring a sense of normality, to bring sense of happiness, because I knew that those were things they were missing out on because I had went through that. And I also wanted that so badly not to happen, which ended up happening. So keeping all those things in mind, it wasn't hard for me to focus and insulate myself with them when I had the time. I think that was the motivation.
That's something else I think is really powerful is that you were able to use something that was a very painful experience from your past and from your childhood. And that became an asset for you, a strength for you, because when that happened again and you went through it with your own kids, you were easily able to get into their emotions and understand how it would impact them. And you did your absolute best to keep them insulated from that. So, as much as possible, they could grow up with a normal childhood. That to me is amazing.
Thank you, and you're spot on with that, spot on. And we'll talk about it as we go through, I'm sure, in this interview. But one of the things that I try to teach gentlemen that I work with is sometimes you learn the most from the most difficult, unfortunate scenarios in your life. And not to say that you look for bad things that happen to you and you want to go through them, but when life presents you those things, if you learn from them, you can take those learnings and a lot of times you can help others. And in this instance, I mean, I literally was trying to help my kids because I knew what they were, to a large degree, what they were feeling because I was feeling the same thing. I mean, I remember I wanted my parents to be together so bad until I realized that just couldn't happen, you know. And I mean, even I saw it even with my kids for a long while. They wanted us to be together, and then eventually they saw that that probably could not happen, and then they eventually moved on. But to your point, um, yeah, when you go through something bad, you can learn from it, and I think that takes some of the sting out of it, you know, and
Yeah.
that's what I tried to do.
What was the hardest lesson for you to learn as a dad, and what did it teach you?
I had to learn that as much as you want to protect your kids, as much as you want things to be perfect for them, um, you can't do that. I mean, yes, you can protect them, but they have to go through their own life lessons too. So, what I learned was, of course, you don't want their lessons to be so bad that it creates something that maybe they can't come back from, you know, but you have to sometimes let them find out their way. So you kind of monitor it and like, okay, well, they may dip their hand here, it's gonna be a little warm. Now, they're not gonna put it in the fire where they're gonna burn it off, but it's gonna be a little warm, and they'll learn that this is hot and you don't wanna touch that, and I use that analogy where, um because as parents, myself, and I've seen this with other parents, sometimes we want to control the whole narrative, and I realize that's not our role.
And
Our
that
role
fights so much against our instinct because as dads, we see our role as protectors. We're supposed to shield our kids, we're supposed to be on guard and avoid some of these situations from having to happen to them. And it just fights against that when you have to say, these are some lessons you're going to have to learn on your own. I mean, did you feel that pull against that instinct?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think about like when they would maybe tell me about some problems they were having with some kids at school or some kids that they were playing with, and instinctively I wanted to go there and sort it out and take care of it and make it right. And I began to realize that that's not my role. Now, if they were in a situation where they were being abused, then that is my role to stop that, but I had to, look at kind of survey what's going on and be like, you know what, this is age appropriate discourse. And some of this they have to learn how to deal with. And I can't clean it all up because they won't be prepared as adults to deal with conflict, so forth and so on.
Did you ever feel alone as a dad where you're just in certain spots or certain stages through your child's development or something that you're going through where you're just feeling like you're in this spot and no one is there with you? Did that ever happen to you?
Well, in my case, it absolutely happened. I think a lot of it happened when the transition of the family being together and then the reality of me and their mother not being together, where I felt alone with my struggle and fight to stay in their lives and to do that and for the outside world to understand what I was actually going through. So I felt very much alone at that point. And then there was times when I physically felt alone when they were just not with me. And sometimes I would sit back and I would literally be in my residence, my apartment by myself. And I was just like, how did I end up like this? You know, because I always wanted, you know, a family, you know. So definitely I felt um, alone in that regard. But probably the biggest one was my quest to, retain my parental rights and to be involved in their lives from an equal share. Um, that fight that I had, I felt very much alone in that because a lot of people, the way society is set up, when the marriages break up, you're just supposed to turn them over to the mother. And I just didn't feel that way. I didn't feel like I wasn't suggesting they shouldn't be actively involved with their mother. I believe children need a mother and a father equally. They're equal importance. So I was 100% with that. But sometimes what I'm beginning to learn is in our society, um, it kind of like, well, if the parents aren't going to be together, mom is going to take care of them and dad's just going to provide a check. And I wasn't signing on to that.
Did you ever feel like, at any point, did you ever feel like you had the support that you needed to be a really good dad?
I had situationally, I had actually, for a significant period of my kids' lives, my mother was very impactful. Um, and my mother, even though she was my mother and giving me wisdom from a mother's perspective, I kind of took it as wisdom from a parent's perspective. And then I think about, other people in my life that would come in and out and they would share bits and pieces of things with me that I would try to utilize to make me the best father possible. So I'm not going to say I didn't have support. I did have support, but it was more situational, and it was up to me to, in a lot of ways, go find it and seek it out.
For time reasons, this conversation will continue as part 2 in the next episode. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find this one and catch up on others you missed at thefatherhoodchallenge.com. That's thefatherhoodchallenge.com. You can also find and listen to the Fatherhood Challenge on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for listening.